Hello, and welcome to the delicious recipe here on UPRN. This one's called Pumpkin Spice Latte, and I have a returning guest who I love to have on here all the time there, Miss Varla Ventura. And you can check out some of the books that she's done there. There's Among the Mermaids, Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires, The Book of the Bizarre, Freaky Facts of and Strange Stories, Fairies, Pukas, and Changelings, Beyond Bizarre, Frightening Facts, She Rose, Bold, Brash, and Absolutely Unabashed, and plus there's many more. And we've gone and we talked about many things around, and because it's Halloween month here on UPRN, and we're doing things. I'm just so glad that this lovely guest is able to come back and grace my show once again. Welcome.
Well, thanks, Dell. Thanks for having me back. It's always nice to be back, and especially in around Halloween time. Kind of made it a tradition.
Oh, I forgot to go in. Watching the ones and twos is Hey You, and then his new friend there, Kitten Mouth. So
Nice, nice.
yeah, so they're also watching the back sensors and doing everything else. They're watching the show.
Oh,
So
cool. Hey, guys.
Laura Lee doesn't know I've called that cat Kitten Mouth, but that's what it's called now.
She
So
does now. Yeah.
so tell me about this is Halloween time.
Yeah. Here we
Samhain.
are. Yeah.
The veil is supposed to be at the thinnest part going there, and the time of witches, ghouls, and gremlins, and everything like that. And you've done lots of, well, your books there, anyways, of dealing with this stuff, the fairy realm, and ghouls and pukas and stuff like that. And this is also the season of death, right? The end of the
Hmm.
harvest where everything dies. Now, do you think that that's part of the reason why this strange phenomenon of people thinking that the dead is coming alive?
Yeah. I mean, I've been just contemplating, death and darkness a little more than usual lately.
Right?
Um, And I think there's something about like darkness as a whole that sort of invokes this feeling of the unknown, the which is synonymous with death. And so, like, we know that, in the tarot, for example, if you get the death card, that doesn't mean that you're going to die. It means that there's some kind of very significant change taking place because death marks a change and then a renewal, just
Hmm.
as this season marks that. And in particular, if you think about it in terms of like the weather changing and sort of harvest time, plants are sort of dying, they're decomposing into the ground. They'll be that way over the winter, but through that process, they're nurturing the soil for something that's going to come in the spring. So it's all part of that cycle.
Hmm.
But it also has very practically, it's actually darker, right? Like
Right.
it's darker earlier.
Hmm.
Of course, we have, the time change. Here where I live, we have the time change, but it still doesn't help. It's still darker. It's still darker earlier.
Are they? Did they do that there? Did they do daylight savings there, or that was
Yes.
eliminated? I thought that was
Nope.
eliminated.
Nope. There's been talk of eliminating it on and off over the years. But here in the US, we still, with like the exception of a couple of places, we still observe the time change, which means that in the spring, the clocks all move forward an hour, and in the fall, they go back an hour. But I like it because I get an extra hour of darkness, which makes me happy. So I don't complain about it one bit. But even aside from that, I think that usually takes place here in early November. All of those things, just the fact that that sort of a more modern tradition takes place around the same time as so many other holidays, particularly in the northern hemisphere, where you have Samhain, which is the Celtic beginnings of Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
You have Halloween as we celebrate it today. You have Dia de los Muertos, which is the celebration of the dead, and many other traditions around in particular in the Northern Hemisphere this time of year. And all of these things kind of are connected to the idea that we are kind of like facing this darkness, this unknown. We're entering into winter,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to do two things. One, we need to ask all of the spirits possible and available to look over us and guide us as we go into the darkness of winter, which can be a very, very trying time. It
Mm-hmm.
was a trying time once upon a time when you had to hunt all your food, and it's a trying time for other reasons today. There's there's a direct connection with this time of year and mental illness, rates of depression and suicide go up. So that's all kind of
Mm-hmm.
tied in with the tradition of sort of like asking for kind of some help to get through the next few months. There's also a celebratory aspect in which you're celebrating this grand harvest. You're celebrating what you have, and it's not one or the other. It's a combination. So traditionally, Samhain as the Celtic holiday was exactly about that. It was about having bonfires and warding off evil spirits and then welcoming in the ones that would help. And
Right.
just kind of, trying to get things situated before the darkness really comes and envelops us. I'm just going to clean my screen because I feel like my camera is
Well,
a little
it,
bit
it
dirty
was
there.
it was
Oh, that
also
made a big difference.
it was also a part of the thing about sharing the benefits of the work that you did during the whole spring summer and into there and
Absolutely.
sharing stuff. And the part is that the the Catholic Church had sort of appropriated it and made it sort of that it was an evil thing, right? Because they're money hungering an entity.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my opinion. People out
It's
there,
my
you can.
opinion too. So, shared
So
opinion.
right. So it was a part out there is that there was a whole thing there where they got rid of the barter system and the whole thing about sharing and helping out your fellow neighbor and stuff like that and making you dependent upon the government and the church. And that was the whole thing. And that's why they sort of took these six different times.
Significant holidays in the Celtic
Correct.
will year. Yeah.
And they put them into the church.
Yeah, into the Roman calendar, absolutely. And we know them today, we know them actually quite frequently people know them more as the Roman holiday than they do the original holiday. But you're absolutely right. There was a huge celebration of sharing, all of the food and the feast that you had worked so hard to everything you had accomplished. We were talking about a time in particular when like people really relied on crops and foraging and what was in the forest and what they were growing
and your
for
neighbor.
food, for medicine, and you relied on your neighbor. And it's
Mm.
interesting because my son just happens to be studying this unit in school right now about he's actually studying about the Ojibwe. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that the teacher was asking them is kind of about some of the founding principles of the Ojibwe belief system. And that includes something that he's referring to, or the teacher is referring to, as like it's not a commodity in the monetary sense, but it's sort of like personal contributions.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just having this conversation because my son was like, well, we just like, if you learn, it's kind of about learning like shared skills, and what is the good of learning skills? Why do you go and learn something?
Mm-hmm.
And that led us to this discussion about that education, whether that's in the fields or in a classroom,
Mm-hmm.
really ultimately can and should be used to contribute back to the community. And that also led to the discussion of like, really, this really all started really peaking when COVID came around, people were just like hoarding toilet paper and crazy things like that.
Right.
It was just like, oh man.
Yeah.
So there was just like, we just kind of just led this to the discussion where I said, I want you to live on a safe street, but I also want, our neighbor girl across the street, Amelia, I want her to live on a safe street too. And
Mhm.
I don't want her to have any less of a safe experience than you. And so we just
Right.
kind of started talking about that. If I've got 10 of this and you've got 10 of that, let's each have 5 instead of holding on to our 10. And just kind of that whole discussion, which
Mhm.
I think also segues into another very significant holiday in the United States, is the Thanksgiving holiday. And really, there's been a much better recognition of that as an Indigenous holiday and telling the true story of what happened, not like,
Yeah.
yeah, hey, these like pilgrims opened their gates and the natives all came running in. It was like really quite the opposite. The natives really, the indigenous people, we wouldn't be here had they not saved the lives of those
Mhm.
colonists back in the day.
Right.
So anyway, that's another but it's still another holiday that has been taken by the church and turned into something, being this like, okay, this is God's grace that we have this harvest, but it's all tied into the same time of year, right? So you still
Mhm.
have this the celebration of the harvest and a lot of work. There's a lot of work leading up to a holiday like that. So if you think about the weather, I'm sure you and I have very similar weather where we live. And
Yep.
if you go back into kind of where traditional Celtic, population was, the UK, Ireland, parts of France. I mean, it was like spread out more or less over those areas. But this time of year, it does start to get pretty cold, especially in the more northern regions. It can, it could snow. You kind of get, all the crops die. And so there's this huge rush leading up to that, not only to harvest everything, but to, preserve things, to
Mhm.
cook them in a way that they're, to have a place to store things,
Mhm.
and then even, I mean, even today, where it's like, okay, what are you going to do with all these tomatoes in your garden? And people end up canning them and things like that. And you kind of create this store to get you through the winter. But it wasn't just to get you, Dell, through the winter, or me, Varla, through the winter. It was to get us through the winter.
Yeah,
My household, your household, our whole community together. And
you, you
yeah,
were
so
you were absolutely correct, because I remember this as growing up. There is that my grandmother, both grandmothers on both sides, they would have the ladies would come over and they would do pickling, canning, food stuff there during, like, and it was a shared experience, and everyone would take an equal share of something that
yeah,
they would
yeah,
have that, right? Everybody
yeah. Yeah,
inputted
it was
stuff.
like a putting up. They used to call it putting up, and it would be like, sometimes it would be over multiple days,
Hmm.
and you would like, okay, I've got all of this, I've got all of that, I've got
Hmm.
herbs in my garden, and I've got these preservatives, and yes, and you would like spend all this time together cooking and canning, preserving the foods, and then the families would all have an equal share of them, which is
And
beautiful. I mean, that's so amazing.
oh yeah, for sure. And this comes into this weird part, because this comes into the whole trick or treat thing.
Ah,
And
yeah.
this was about the people that didn't have that luxury of having anything, that weren't able to grab stuff. And there's a couple different stories on this there. And then you have the whole thing about the witches and the poison apples, but that's different. But the part about the kids was like they would come
That's a
across.
rumor. Come by my house and find out.
But the whole part was is that because that actually comes into the Christmas time too as well, that the same sort of thing there too as well. But in the Halloween trick or treat was is that it was uh, we're less fortunate than you might have something a little bit extra to help us to get through the next couple little moments in our life.
Hmm.
If you don't, then you get the trick, right? Damage.
Yeah, the trick part. Okay, so one of the stories that I read, um and I really like especially this time of year, if people are looking for like really good sources for these type of materials
Hmm.
beyond myself, of course. I read like if you go on like the Irish Times, like the main newspaper that's based in Dublin, they always have an excellent like they'll have recipes, like the traditional Colcannon and origins and haunted places and all of that stuff. But one of the stories I actually read there a couple of years ago was about the tradition of trick or treating. So we were talking about this huge feast that we're going to have, right? And this huge bonfire. And one of the, because I believe like modern traditions, you can't pinpoint it to one thing. There are all of these things that kind of build into it. So one story isn't, necessarily more accurate than the other. I think together they form what we have today. And so one of the stories that I read that I hadn't heard before was that you would go around, or the children would go around, and they would go to the wealthier neighborhoods, of course, but they would go around and they would ask for either like a little bit of food or wood for the communal fire.
Hmm.
And it wasn't considered begging so much as the people who had the people who had and had these big houses and had successful. It was actually their responsibility to give more and to give forward so that you could. And in fact, it became this sort of display of how wealthy you were or how well off you were the more you gave. It's like today the modern equivalent is getting the whole candy bars in the rich neighborhoods.
Oh yeah, yes. Oh,
Now it's like kids always talk about that.
oh
So
yeah.
there's
I remember that back when I was oh geez, I was early '80s. Was all the kids would be going around trick or treating, and they'd all start talking about whose house has the best
yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
and
And who's
then
giving out toothbrushes or whatever?
yeah, because it's avoid that one, avoid that one. That one has the big chocolate bars, and then you go home, change your costume, go back to that one again.
Oh, now that's some high trickery. I like that. Oh, I might have to share that with my kiddo. You just pop a different mask on and hit the whole
Well,
street
I
again.
found out is that you don't take a bag, you take a pillowcase because the pillowcases that they don't rip as much as a plastic
Yeah,
bag.
the bag will just like pop open.
Yeah,
So
yeah, but
I think that is totally like the sort of what, like, I don't want to say begging because it's not quite what the tradition was. That
yeah,
has this negative connotation, but it
yeah,
was asking. It was the asking for, right?
yeah.
Which then became, that was an excellent opportunity for the church to come in
Hmm.
and snatch the holiday away by saying that we're going to give you this food, and oh, you should give to the church, and then we'll distribute it for you.
Right, the
No
soup
need to
kitchen
trust the
sort of
community organization.
right, the soup kitchen sort of mentality there, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Right, it says that
absolutely.
depend on us, we will take care of you, but still give
Right.
us money, right?
Sounded great in principle, right? And that's why so
Yeah.
many people fell for it. But we know for a fact that for a fact that that is the same church and same attitude that is responsible for taking children from their homes,
Yes.
indigenous children, to
Yes.
beating the culture out of them, all these kind of things we know. So we have for a fact, right? So
I'm just remembering there. It says Halloween. Me and my buddy there, JW, we had ran out of Halloween treats, so we had two cartons of Durex condoms. So we started just giving out
no.
condoms to these kids were going around there, and I know
Like,
we
look
ended
at the balloons these guys gave us.
but you know what? It was probably something that was better than they were getting there and putting a sweet thing in their mouth. They had something that would stop having more kids or something. But
Yeah,
it was
this
better than
has
a
long-term
toothbrush.
repercussions. No trick here. Better than a toothbrush. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, probably. The
Uh,
parents are like, "We'll take those. We'll take those, Timmy. You don't
what
need that. We'll keep
what house
those."
did you get that from?
Yeah. Where'd you get that from? Whose mom gave you that? Um, But another aspect of the trickery, just talking about the trickery, and
Yeah.
this totally plays into, the spooks and the goblins and the fairy element of it,
Yep.
is that as we go into the darkness, um, those creatures which prefer to be veiled from the human eye most of the time, i.e., creatures, supernatural creatures, creatures of the other realm, the fairy realm,
Yep.
they are a little more comfortable sneaking out at night. And
Hmm.
fairies are known for their trickery. I mean, many, many, many stories have their root in basically fairies one-upping humans.
Right.
So you have that element of it, along with the idea that if the fairies and things are moving freely about the night,
The
children would then
countryside.
dress
Yeah.
up. Yeah,
Yeah.
throughout the countryside, just like reveling, children would dress up as a means of fitting in so they wouldn't be snatched away by them.
Correct.
And then, of course, as the church became more influential, it was that there were witches over on the hills dancing with, pagan
Right.
dogs and gods and werewolves and
Their
devils and,
sexuality is
yeah,
so
oh my gosh,
impressive.
they're naked over by the bonfire. And to
Yeah.
be fair, they might have been naked by the bonfire, but not
Right.
because they were cavorting with the devil, but rather they were cavorting with the spirits, and on the whole to
Yeah.
get power. But that was power that would then be used and utilized, not always for good by the definition of good, but it
Hmm.
wasn't an inherently evil act, which is why, today we know that this is a holiday that's sacred to witches,
Hmm.
and is often viewed as the witches' New Year in the Celtic wheel of the year. It's the new year.
Right.
This is when things begin, and then when
It,
oh, please go ahead. Yeah.
because November 1st is what is that's exact November 1st is supposed to be the start of the new year, right? It's a Saints Day.
Right. Yes. Well, it depends on who you ask.
Right.
So in the I actually really love, in particular in Mexico, there's sort of a blending of the Catholic traditions and then other
Hmm.
indigenous traditions that took place that also have kind of they also have similarities and a lot of connection with things that the Celts celebrated at Halloween, and that was really the thin veil. And then you had the Dia de los Muertos, which is really significant holiday in in Mexico and in many other Latin countries. They also celebrate it, but in Mexico in particular, and of course in the United States and Canada, that's also a huge holiday for people of Mexican descent that live in the U.S. or Canada. And they're like, I'm always trying to make sure I include Canada, because I don't want to be that, like, American centric, U.S. centric American who says America, and then everyone else in North America is like, what the hell, you guys? We're also in North America. Check your geography. But anyway,
we're bigger. We're bigger than you.
Yes, because bigger isn't always better, right? So
Well, no, no. Well, I'll tell you some
depends.
women that would say yes. Well, no, but
Well, we know what house they can go trick or treat at, though. So
there you go.
but I think that, just tying back to the food traditions, the idea of creating this altar that might even be just directly on the grave of your loved one, bringing their favorite food, spending weeks, not just a night, but spending weeks preparing recipes and creating the food of the dead, creating these incredible pieces of art that are all for art, for the invisible, for the dead.
Hmm.
They're not for some kind of long-term preservation. These things get dismantled and the flowers get composted, and but there's even pan de muerto, which is a special bread that's baked, and it has like a sugary top, and it's
Right.
super yummy. And you get
Hmm.
that, and it's in all different kinds of shapes, and you make the sugar skulls and all of these things that are an offering. And in that tradition, November 1st is so I guess by the Catholic Church, I think the first is so the 31st is All Hallows Eve, the first is All Souls Day, and then the second is All Saints Day. And
Mhm.
in the tradition of Dia de los Muertos, you have the first is the day when you leave offerings to lost souls and the souls of children.
Right.
So people who maybe don't have someone tending their grave or young kids, and then the second is for like your near family.
Right.
And but it's that connection and the idea that the dead are walking among us that night. That
Mm.
is what is resonates as so similar to the Celtic traditions. Is that you're burning fires, you're making food, and you're cavorting with the spirits, hoping that they'll help you get through the
Mhm.
rest of the cold winter. And
Right.
it can actually be a very cathartic experience for anyone who has lost someone, whether it's very recently in the last year, or if it's someone that you've been missing for the majority of your life, to create even a small altar in your home and
Mhm.
give them an offering. And it doesn't you can include a photo of the person or an object of the person. It can be a very humble thing. It doesn't have to be a big elaborate altar or creation, but it's the intention that, and in particular on the night, such as on Halloween night, is a great time to burn a candle and just like really thank them for what they've given and make a connection with them. Maybe ask them for guidance. Just do a little light necromancy. We're not talking about anything like too
Right.
deep. If you want to get into like the deep stuff, there's a
Yeah.
lot more to that, and there's certainly like a lot more preparation. But
Mhm.
making a simple offering and uh, just talking to someone who you miss is can be very cathartic. And I think we spend a lot of time suppressing grief, right? That's like where
Yeah.
you're supposed to grieve for this certain amount of time. And many religious traditions do have a very set amount of time, and then you sort of move on. But I mean, anyone who's experienced grief, and I would wager to say that that's most people at this point in their lives, most people have experienced grief in some way. It could even be the loss of a pet, can be, but
Yep.
it's like we're expected to just, you grieve, you go to the funeral, you say goodbye, and then move on. And it really doesn't work like that at all. It just comes in waves, and it comes at times. And I think that that's because we try and tuck it into a neat little package, and
Package.
it just doesn't work like that. But if you have a time where every year you're going to actually be able to like let that out,
Mhm.
I think that can be a very, very healthy for your psyche.
Well, that's the same thing as it goes like with music. And then I play a lot of music and I play a lot of instruments and stuff like that. Is that you can go and all of a sudden one day you hear the start of a song and stuff like that, and all of a sudden it transports you back to something, a memory, right? And that
Yeah,
sort of unlocks something in your brain, right?
yeah.
And it's that,
Travel. There you
that's
go. You unlock the secret to time travel, Dell. That's
there you,
amazing.
yeah. No, I've noticed it many times. There's and stuff like that. Is that just yeah, that unlocking stuff, and there's like the whole part is like we were saying out there, people that are listening along here. This is Varla Ventura here on the show, here on the Delicious Recipe, and we're talking Halloween stuff. Uh, we can get into the witchy stuff if you want to about witches and bad apples too, and but
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
but trick or treating treats and stuff like that. Where did it come the whole part that witches were bad? Did you ever find out how that went
Well,
there?
I mean, we can make the blanket statement that it was the Catholics.
Right.
But I think the idea, I mean, there was a wild power associated with women, and they were frequently the keepers of medicine
Mm-hmm.
and plant wisdom. They
Right.
had knowledge about, the ways of the world and love and relationships and childbirth and all of these things that were not, I mean, that were a mystery to men in many ways, right? So,
Right. Well, he had men were out there, being the protectors, the hunters, the gatherers, and doing stuff like that, and they'd be off in there. And then you had basically the women, the wise ones. Sometimes they were called like that, that were
yeah, yeah.
taking care of the prodigy and basically cleaning the house, I guess, in a way, or taking
Yeah, in a manner
care.
of speaking, like tending the hearth and making sure that things were healthy, and that's just sort of speaking very broadly. Of
Right.
course, we
Yeah.
we want to acknowledge that there were people who were two spirit and they had a role in society, not necessarily conforming to one or the other. There were people who were maybe not born with male anatomy that identified better with female. I mean, of course, I'll acknowledge that, but in like the broad sense, as
Hmm.
far as witches becoming bad, I mean, it really there was I mean,
The Puritans.
as soon as the story of Adam and Eve came around, women
Yeah.
were immediately associated. Speaking of poison apples, women
Right.
were immediately associated with the devil, being
Hmm.
weak-willed, and it wasn't. That's
And
not
trick
necessarily the
and a
original
trickster.
story, right? That's like the King James version.
Right.
What
And yeah, and a trickster, right? Too. That was the whole part there, is that she
and
tricked.
tricked Adam, yes. And then
Yeah.
now they had to leave. They had to leave Eden, and it was all her fault.
Right.
So you
Yes.
had that origin story, which was basically the thumping basis of you know um, the Roman Catholic religion as
Yeah.
the cultures were beginning to collide. But you also had women traditionally, and certainly all over the world and in Europe, in all of the countries in sort of Europe and North America, you had women in roles of power because they were the keepers of medicine and secrets. And frequently then in kind of the medieval times, you started having like the heavier doctrine of the church. There was actually a very long period of time, a couple of 100 years, where the pagans and the Catholics kind of mixed together
Hmm.
where no people were born of different generations and they knew both belief systems, and they sort of coexisted without the extremes for a while there. But
Hmm.
really, as far as like witches becoming like the witch craze, I mean, that was really brought on by the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, having this doctrine that women were bad and evil,
Hmm.
and then discovering that there were women with power, and the church saying, well, we're going to take that power. And the only way to take that power is to take those women, take their land, take their knowledge, call them a witch, and then let everybody join in on that bandwagon. And the
Yeah.
thing is like so many things today, right? Like people joined that craze to avoid being accused themselves. And
Hmm.
so that's why then when you fast forward to like the Salem witch trials, you had young Puritan, I mean, there's these really uptight Puritans, but you had young girls accusing other young girls. Well, I mean, any girl who's ever gone to high school can tell you what the locker room is in PE during physical education, and
Well,
you
I
immediately
like
understand how the Salem witch trials took place,
I like that boy. I like him more than you.
Yeah,
You're a
yeah. I mean,
witch.
just and bored and afraid, living in a lot
Yeah.
of fear of what was wild and unknown.
Right.
A lot of fear. And so those things led to the accusation of women being witches and keeping secrets rather than keeping secrets. It became a negative thing.
Right.
And then it was, it was also conveniently frequently tied in with women who had power and land and
Hmm.
some fortune themselves. And so
So
that
so what
became
So how does the warlock thing come in there, where the male witches, or are they called like that, where they didn't get vilified as much as the female
Oh,
witch?
there were, I believe, like in Salem, I can't remember quite how many, but there were a handful of men that were also hung. There
Right.
were always men that were accused of
Witchcraft.
witchcraft. Yeah.
Okay.
And as far as like warlock versus witch, I kind of feel like anyone could may identify as a witch and
Right.
do most women don't identify as warlocks necessarily. That does tend to be kind of more of a male term for someone who practices
Hmm.
witchcraft. But yeah, men were definitely, men flew under the radar.
Okay.
And they weren't really the ones withholding these so-called secrets. They
Right.
weren't really the ones to blame, and so frequently you would even have husbands turning on wives to keep in the good graces of whatever constable so and so,
Hmm.
constable
Right.
blowhard here at your service.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that certainly there were men who didn't fit in with the regular confines of society were certainly vilified and
Right.
still are today, but by and large they were they just weren't considered as vulnerable or as weak, and therefore they couldn't just be pulled off their land. Men had rights. Women couldn't vote. they
Oh,
they
that's true.
they
Yeah.
had to marry.
Yeah.
There were all of these things. Men had inherent rights. It was the king himself who declared these things. As long as you
Hmm.
paid back a little to the church and to the crown, you'd
Yeah.
be okay. But women had none of those things. They had to marry strategically. They had to, um, do
See.
what they were told to do. And
Hmm.
whenever any woman that ever defied that, which was historically many, many women, were accused of being witches,
Conniving.
werewolves, vampires, cavorting
Yeah.
with spirits,
Yeah.
whoring around, all of those things, just for
Yeah.
not being the meek, apologetic creature that is supposed to say sorry that we gave you that apple.
Right. Yeah. The poison apple.
Look, you're the idiot who ate it, okay?
I remember, I think it was on that movie or television show, Supernatural, and they said it wasn't an apple, it was a quince, because
Oh, a quince.
yes, because apples didn't exist over there in that part of the world. But
Well,
we've
yeah. Also, something interesting about apples is that apples, and I don't think this is true of quince. I think quince grow and they just grow, on the tree. They look a little like like a lumpy apple.
yeah.
But apples and most pears require grafting. If you go and plant an apple seed from the middle of your favorite apple, you're not going to get your favorite apple. You're just going
No.
to get like some kind of stock apple that's
Yeah.
probably not that tasty,
Yeah.
and you have to graft from an existing tree if you want like a pink lady or a Macintosh or
Yeah.
whatever kind of apple you're going for. So even if
It's,
it was an apple, it wasn't a tasty one.
yeah, same thing with avocados. Avocados, you have to graft from the one that you finally find, that you get one that's tasty, because you cannot plant an avocado seed.
Ah,
I
ah.
tried, and you
And
don't
you'll
get,
get a plant, but you won't necessarily get, and it might fruit,
yeah,
but
but
you
you won't
won't
get any,
necessarily, you
get
won't
anything
get
that tastes good.
yeah, you won't get the thing that you're
Yeah.
hoping for, which is not the case with a lot of other plants and seeds. Like if you've got a crop of like the greatest corn, if
Yeah.
you save seeds from the best looking corn or the finest looking pumpkin or something like that, then you've got you've got your greatest. Uh, you do that natural selection thing.
Yeah. Oh, we're getting a whole bunch of things. I gotta find if I can block this person. They're sexy girls. I guess this is
Come on, we need comments from actual listeners.
exactly.
It's probably because
Find
you said
dates.
condom or something on the air.
Maybe
Like some
prob.
bot is like, "Ooh, they're talking about sex. Witches, let's get to it."
Witches and condoms.
No one's safe.
Witchy condoms.
I thought you would appreciate. I know people are listening; they can't see this, but check out this cool mug that I'm drinking out of.
Oh
It's
my,
actually got. But if you
that
look to
is
the
awesome.
side, I know Laura would love this. If you look to the side, the skull's kind of like
Oh
embedded
wow.
in there. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. She made a couple different things there. She made me a cup there too a little while ago. It's done. She lacquered it all up. It's got like Van Halen on one side. The other side is Pickle Rick and with my
Nice.
name on there. Just
Aw,
like yeah,
that's great.
my coffee mug. But yeah, she's been busy with her craft. She's out craft shopping right now. So
Nice. She's amazing.
yeah,
Does she have
well,
like an Etsy shop yet?
nope.
She really could and should. I mean,
Yes, well, let's get to the part there is that we have so much stuff here that there's only a few more chairs to walk or sit on here now
You got to
because
start selling it off, Del. That way you got room for more.
it's like, oh my God, it says, are you selling this stuff? Come on. But anyways, that's another thing. Well, she could probably do that for Halloween,
Oh,
but who
I've
knows?
seen the things she makes. They're absolutely beautiful. She sent me a few
Oh
little
yeah, her like
videos
her little
too.
Ouija boards
Yeah,
and
the like
yeah,
crystal grid, those
yeah.
yeah, those are amazing. Really amazing.
Yeah, she spends a lot of time on it, and no, it's really, really awesome stuff there.
Yeah.
And she does have a place there you can check out on the Angel Rock and contact her there, people that are listening, and see if she can go and make something for you. But other than that, it said, where are we going to go from here there? Witchy, werewolves,
I was kind of thinking about,
pukas.
well, it's interesting because I was like thinking about like just in the contemplation of darkness and some of the key, like I was thinking about like really classic costumes, like classic Halloween
Mhm.
costumes. And they kind of come down to like you got witch, mummy, werewolf, skeleton, and vampire. And of course, vampires love this time of year. But I was really thinking about that sort of, it kind of ties in again with the element of darkness that is so prevalent at this time of year in everyone's minds, in the physical world around you. You
Mhm.
also have, an abundance of bats, right? Bats are like they come out at night, they come out at
Yeah.
twilight, and then you kind of see how some of these visual things became part of the origins of these like legends of bats
Scary,
transforming into
scary
vampires.
things. Scary
Yeah,
things, right?
and then there's blood, so that
Yeah.
actually ties in with women being persecuted as well. For um, most women, blood is not particularly scary.
Right.
Once
20 every
you're
28
of age,
days.
you see it
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
So when you see it, it doesn't like freak you out quite as much as if you've never seen blood before. And I
Mm,
think you had people in very like specific roles,
yeah.
especially like in the Victorian era when like Dracula was born
Hmm.
from Bram Stoker's imagination. And of course, that's not the first vampire story ever. But that was a time of a lot of medical experimentation.
Oh
It
yeah.
was a time, which means it was a time of grave robbing. And it was a time of not fully understanding the decomposition process. I remember that
Mm,
reading this story about the origin of, when you see vampires, like the classic Dracula or even Nosferatu, where the arms are crossed across the chest, and
right.
that's
Yeah.
synonymous with like a vampire rising out of the coffin. And that
Hmm.
at this time when there was great medical experimentation, and this was taking place, um, there were two cities actually in the UK that were very known for their advancements in medicine, and that was in Dublin and in Edinburgh, Scotland. And Bram Stoker, who is Irish,
Yeah.
um, had like these stories, I mean, he was an educated man, the stories, the rumors of grave robbing, and that this grave robbing wasn't, we think of grave robbing like, oh yeah, you just really want the ring, right? But
Yeah.
actually, people were taking, especially freshly dead corpses, for the purpose of
Experimentation.
yeah, learning about what actually was
Yeah.
inside the human body, and medical experimentation, in order to advance our understanding of the human body. And
Hmm.
when rigor mortis sets in, now if you lay someone in their coffin, and after you have their wake and all of that, but you lay them in their coffin, and people were laid out in crypts a lot, not necessarily,
Yeah.
not always just buried in the ground, but you get the coffin out, whatever way you do it, and the body would actually spring forward out of the coffin a bit, and the
Yeah.
arms would be crossed because that's how they'd be laid to rest. And so, of course, imagine you're just some like very like uneducated pauper who's been paid
Yeah.
a few bob to go and like get this fresh
Go grab this thing there, and then all of a
yeah,
sudden,
go
pop.
grab old man Jackson or whatever, and then you go into the cemetery and this thing rests, and then you're just going to run screaming. And then, of
Yeah.
course, to cover your tracks, you're either going to say it was a vampire, or you're going to believe it was a vampire.
Mm.
And so these kind of stories were actually, very kind of, see, we're going to make all of those spam bots that spammed your chat regret getting involved here, because now we're getting into necromancy. So.
Actually,
Um,
there was a documentary I watched on this lady, and she's somewhere in the States, I think in South Carolina or something like that, and she is the head of a forensics thing, and she takes bodies
mm,
and she puts them out onto her farm, and she covers them over with like uh, chain mail, or not chain mail, like fencing, and she sees how what bugs come and eat it to go and do that, and she
right.
takes the bugs, and that's how she figures out how long a body has been done,
Has
and
been,
she gets paid.
yeah, it's a division of forensics, right? It's
Right? Yeah.
criminal
Yeah.
forensics, and there are actually body farms.
Yeah.
And first time I ever heard about, like, I guess maybe I knew they existed if I thought about it logically, but like I never thought about it. And I was
Yeah.
listening to this podcast called Criminal,
Yeah.
which is I love it. And the host, Phoebe Judge, went out to a body farm, and she's a very poised, composed
Hmm.
interviewer, and you could hear in her voice, oh, because at that particular one, it was like one for the study of criminal forensics, and so they would put bodies in positions like if they had been in a car accident,
Yeah.
or if they'd just been left out, or if something had been decapitated or something like that,
Right.
and
So they're
and
looking
then
for
they follow.
timelines.
Yeah, and they're looking for timelines, which is apps, and that's actually, you can donate your body to a body farm when you go, if you're really into it.
Right.
But
That's why you have to worry about signing what you sign on your license there.
careful what you sign away.
But anyways, we got
I'll
about
take the heart.
1 minute left there, Varla, and I wish this could go on for another hour there, Varla. Tell them where they can go and find your books and find everything else there.
Yeah, well, thank you again, Del, for having me. It's always such a pleasure, and it does go by fast. You can visit my website, which is varlaventura.net. So that's a couple of V's in there, varlaventura.net. And I've got links to my books and, occasionally other things on there. I've got a little store, so you can buy some random swag, Varla Ventura swag and stuff. And yeah, I'm there, and I keep up moderately on Facebook. Not too great on the social media these days, but I'm around. So if you ping me, I may eventually get back to you, as Del knows.
Yes, I know it.
But yeah,
I'm
varlaventura.net. That's where you can find out more.
I'm just so happy that I got you back on again there,
I
because
so
it's
appreciate it. You're actually my first interview since I had spinal fusion surgery. about a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to that, I had about a month of like, well, I was just not in any shape to be seen or talk, which is what led to the surgery, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you're my first. It's really hard for me to get through October without talking to you guys and just having interviews in general. But you're my first back, and so thanks.
I
You made it
appreciate
easy.
I appreciate it, and I always love you. And you're one of my favorite guests that I ever have on there. And I just want to say you've been watching the Delicious Recipe. Next week I got on Rachel Dodds, and we're dealing with hidden evil messages in music. So
Ooh, that's a great one.
yes,
That
so
sounds
we'll be going
fun.
through that. So thank you all for listening there. Tune in for the next show there on UPRN. I think it's Michael with Red Pill News. And we'll talk to you all next week.
All right. Bye.